All right, so my name is Jason Downey. This is my fun hobby slide here. In case you guys haven't noticed, because I'm on stage, I'm 5.5 feet tall, so I like to think that I'm taller on the internet. I love to travel. I'm a kickboxer, Muay Thai fighter. I hate cold weather. I really like ice cream, and my hobbies are chess. And well, I guess as you all learn over the next hour or so, I'm kind of a goofball. So let's make friends. Like, come find me any point after my talk, and if you've got similar interests or questions about anything I talk about, let's hash that out. My boss told me I had to have a professional slide, and this was actually the last time that I was photographed wearing a suit, so that's why it's on the professional slide. But I'm a consultant at Red Siege. I'm a full-time penetration tester. I spend 90% of my time looking at green text on black background, and then 10% of my time cussing at Microsoft Word because report writing is not always the most fun. I've been in IT since 2006. I began my career as a Cisco engineer, then eventually went to network security, and then into full-time pen testing. I just rounded my 3 years at Red Siege and pen testing full-time. It's been an absolute blast. I, for some reason, went and got a master's in computer science. Don't ask me why, I can't tell you, but I did it. I got some certifications. You can find me on Twitter at @HackandBackpack. And I know this conference really started as like something very education-based. He did it, not me. And so if you're a part of like a cyber club, or if you're a teacher or educator in any way, shape, or fashion, I will absolutely come and speak to your students or virtually for free. I'm really passionate about pen testing. It kind of turned me in from like a very like ADD, like unable to go anywhere. I was able to like harness my energy, and it's done wonders for me. I would love to see as many people get an InfoSec and live their dreams as possible. I get very excited. I talk fast, so there's a very good chance that part of the way through this presentation, I'm gonna start talking really fast and get excited and start going like this and move my hands around a lot. If that happens, just like wave your hand at me and tell me to slow down. I'd be more than happy to repeat whatever the hell I just said 30 seconds prior. So thank you very much for that. Feedback is a gift. For those of you that have ever done social engineering or heard about social engineering, you have what's called your pretext, right? And your pretext is sort of like your backstory before you actually begin your operation. And I'm going to give you guys a quick 5-minute pretext about what I'm going to talk about. That way, if you hate the idea of it, you can just go ahead and leave, and we don't have to take it personally, and you don't feel like you wasted an hour. If you're here for some like new, latest, greatest zero-day hacking technique, we're not going to be covering that stuff. This is a very intro level, how to break into the industry type talk. There are not going to be very many bullet points during my presentation. I personally don't like it when someone presents and then just reads what's on the slides. So the slides are really there for like me. They're to remind me what to talk about. So there'll be like 1 or 2 that'll be good to like take notes of, and I'll give some direction on that. But otherwise, like, don't feel like you've got to be bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like writing down everything I'm talking about. Is a pointless presentation. I'm using that from now on. Thank you. For those of you that are a little bit younger, this is a group called the Backstreet Boys. They did a song called, I don't know, but the chorus was Tell Me Why. InfoSec for me was very difficult to break into. And unlike a lot of other career paths, there's not a direct way to go from outside of the industry to being entry level, to being intermediate, to being advanced. And so a lot of us are kind of all figuring out as we go along. And there are really 6 kind of key things that if somebody would have looked me in the face and been like, hey, Jason, this is what you should do, it would have made my life a whole lot easier breaking into the industry. And then definitely my first year pen testing would have made it a whole lot easier. So I really wanted to share a lot of my past experiences and my thoughts and try to make it an easier time for anybody that's also looking to make the same jump that I did. I work for a company called Red Siege. Red Siege is a full-blooded consultancy company. We are essentially hackers for hire. I talk about our clients a lot. And when I talk about our clients, these are people that hire us for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, etc. So when you all hear me talk about clients, it's not a direct correlation, but for those of you that end up in pen testing roles or work for like a larger organization, you're part of like an internal red team, essentially your clients are going to be your business or other IT teams that are hiring you internally to do that kind of job. So I'll use the word clients a lot. And even if it doesn't specifically pertain to your own organization, the concepts do pretty much directly correlate over. All right, so number one. I'm sorry, I'm coming out swinging. So the first thing about pen testing when you get started is you are going to suck. Like a lot. Like a lot. And so if you're not prepared for failure, do not become a pen tester, because 90% of our job is overcoming those failures. Oh, gotcha. All right. And then you're going to continue to suck until you learn to play into your strengths. I know when I was looking for entry-level pen testing roles, these were a lot of the requirements that I saw, right? It was, in order to become an entry-level penetration tester, you need 5 years experience. You have to have a master's degree, and you have to have a level 9 dwarf warrior, and uncle who owns a car dealership, and you gotta know somebody who works here, and vouched for by the government, and all this crazy stuff. We'll talk about some InfoSec gatekeeping a little bit later, right? But I struggled really hard when I was going to apply for a pen test job, and they're like, well, you need experience. I'm like, well, I'm trying to get that, but you won't give it to me because I got to get the job to get the experience to get the job that you're supposed to give me, right? And eventually, I got offered a job at Red Siege. Admittedly, when I made this slide, I didn't take into the fact that everyone else in Red Siege is a normal-sized human, and I definitely fall on the small side. But I was employee number 4 at Red Siege. There was 3 other employees. Our principal consultant, whose name is Mike, who'd been pen testing, 12 or 15 years. Another guy named Corey, who'd been 10 years plus. And then our CEO, his name is Tim Medine. He is the course author for SEC 560. So he literally writes the book on pen testing. And also invented curb roasting, which if you guys know about that, it's like changed security for the last decade, right? And then there's me, Jason Downey, first-time pen tester that somehow ended up at this organization, right? And at first it was like, oh, Jason, we trust you. You're going to work on this stuff. And I was like, oh, this is really great. In reality, they just wanted to make me do all the stuff they didn't want to do anymore, right? But that's how we cut our teeth. I learned that in hindsight, right? I have a really good team. My team has allowed me to grow, but it wasn't always easy. Specifically, we talk about report writing, and I was not a great writer. So this excerpt that I've got cut up here, this is actually not from a client report because we don't like to share client data. This is just from a blog post. And it's pretty ruthless when you put like hours and hours and hours into like writing and then somebody else like tears it apart in 45 minutes. Like my soul was taken from my body the first time Mike Saunders PR'd one of my reports. I spent 10 or 15 hours extra, and it just wasn't great. So I remember when that happened, right? And I'd put all this extra time into my job, thinking that I was finally getting good, and then I got kind of shredded to pieces. And I had kind of like that existential crisis of, I spent 4 years or however long trying to get here. I'm finally here. And then 4 months in, I'm struggling. I'm not doing so well. Is this really the right thing for me? At Red Siege, we live fast or we die. I mean, we're consultancy, right? You get in, you do your time, you give the client the report, and then move on to the next test. If it's not good, it's your fault. There's no shared responsibility. Luckily, I had a good team, supported me. Here I am today, still pen testing and mostly happy about it. But imposter syndrome is a very real thing. For those of you that aren't yet Linux admins or Linux gurus, so the concatenate, what it does is it basically takes the text from a file, puts it on screen, you pipe it into a thing called word count, and that's in -L is the number of lines that exist. So when I first started in pen testing, I was like, if I learn these 20 things, I will be a good pen tester. I'm going to know these 20 things, and Mike Saunders is going to love me as a person, and I'm going to be a good pen tester, right? Unfortunately, as I've grown, I've learned that the more you learn, the less you actually know. So, I mean, literally the things that I feel like I have to learn now, it's like 100,000 things. I spent the last 3 years grinding, learning, growing, grinding, learning, growing, and I feel like I know less than I did when I started. So when you see InfoSec talks and they talk about imposter syndrome and they're on stage and you feel like they're really smart because they have the same realization that I did. And that all of you will have at some point during your careers where you feel like you're really smart and you're finally getting it, and then you realize how much little you actually know. And eventually you just accept it, right? Like, oh, I'm just never, ever going to be smart. Do I have any other penetration testers in the room? Anybody out there that's been doing it for a couple years? I'll skip you. And I know we talked about how long you been doing pen test stuff? 12 years? If you had to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put yourself?
6, 7.
Right? Yeah, Ian, how long you been doing it? Yeah, right here. Yeah, Ian. It's like the one that I know, the guy I work with. Yeah. 6 years? 1 to 10, where do you think you are?
Like 5 or 6, honestly.
Yeah, do you feel like that's gone down in the last couple of years, right? Like every time you see someone at DEF CON give some like game-breaking talk, you're like, oh, bro, I didn't know that existed, right? So don't beat yourself up too bad. So even if you're not this wonderful security guru expert, there is still plenty of room in environments where you can actually still make a difference. These were actually some excerpts I pulled from our Slack and from me on Twitter. The top one here, there's a very common password iteration where passwords rotate every 90 days. And us as human beings like to be lazy. And so we come up with ways to come up with new passwords that also rotate 90 days. So you'd be surprised how often fall 2023, winter 2023, exclamation point, spring 2024 is coming up soon, so change your passwords, right? It's almost a guarantee that if a company doesn't have a very good password policy and more than 100 or so employees, like we're probably gonna pop you with something like this. Justin Paulk found a password in an environment that was more than 21 years old, where someone had set up some account originally for some reason and never ever changed it. That's probably not best security practice. Mike Saunders, he calls himself a file archaeologist sometimes, was digging through file shares. There are things called web.config files that sometimes have hard-coded credentials, where a developer will write this config file for an app to do a certain thing, and instead of the end user having to authenticate every time, like, oh, well, we'll just put the credentials in this readable file, right? Which is great until it's on like a public share drive where anyone in the company can go in and see that stuff. So there are still a lot of ways that you can improve your clients' environments without having to be a super security guru. Shortly after my mild mental breakdown, this was a very one-off for me at Red Siege. For those of you that aren't familiar, there was a vulnerability called Eternal Blue that came out in 2017. Essentially, it was a remote code execution that gave you admin on a box for the lack of full technical explanation. And so I'm like 4 hours, I'm doing an internal test. This is where it's like we start internally. I'm scanning the network, using Nmap like we all do on day one. And this shows back up, right? You see where it says vulnerable right there? So that vulnerable to this MS17010. I'm like, man, that has to be wrong. There's no way that this still exists because it was 2020 or 2021 at the time. There's no way this exists. So okay, whatever, I fired up Metasploit because to be honest, as advanced as we get, we all still love Metasploit because it works and they've got a module for Eternal Blue. And 5 minutes later, I've got admin on this box. I figure out then I'm now on the box, I'm figuring out what it is. Turns out it's a domain controller. So I'm 4 hours in on the penetration test and I've got admin on a domain controller. You couldn't tell me shit that day, right? Like I was elite level hacker Metasploit there, right? We don't see these very often in the real world. But for some reason with this client, like they had an MSSP that just for whatever reason missed this domain controller. In a sense, it was a fluke. Blue teaming's hard, right? In a sense, this was a fluke. But luckily, I found it and not some like ransomware actor, right? Because that would have cost them big, big dollars for a very simple-ish fix, right? So I mentioned Mike Saunders, right? This is how Mike Saunders looked at me. So we can meet, we're a full remote team. So this is how I see Mike over our Microsoft Teams meetings. Do you even tech, bro? Like, what are you doing? You messed all this up, yada, yada, yada. But we talk about playing into our strengths. I realized at a very young age, maybe because I'm small, it was important in middle school when everyone else had a growth spurt that I became friends with everybody else. Did not want to end up in a locker, right? Especially kind of being the nerdy computer guy. And so I became very good at talking to people and having sort of like that confidence to just walk up and say, hi, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. And because of that, I lead a lot of our social engineering engagements at Red Siege. I pick up the phone and I make phone calls and people just give me their credentials. It's absolutely wild, right? But that's what I was good at. So I'm working with Mike. Mike is super smart, but Mike was against essentially like an apex defender, multi-million-dollar budget, multi-million-dollar training, multi-million-dollar software solutions. And after 2 weeks, Mike has gotten nowhere. So I'm like, hey, Mike, how about I pick up the phone, I make some phone calls. And 15 minutes later, they've now given me domain admin credentials that I can now hand to Mike and is like, hey, have fun. Mike felt pretty good, right? Because then Mike could continue on with his test with domain admin and essentially, pilfer to his heart's great glory, right? But I found my strength. I learned what I was good at. And someone like Mike, who's a very great technical person, but not the most confident when it comes to doing social engineering campaigns, I was able to add to what he does. And as you all start to enter the field, you'll learn that your past experience very heavily plays into penetration testing in one way or the other. Number 2. So for every cool story that you hear in pen testing, there's actually hours and hours of boring or frustration that goes into that. I promise this doesn't work. Turns out the real world doesn't care that I'm a part-time domain administrator, right? They just don't, it's not actually sexy, right? But we sell it that way. It's very cool to walk up and tell these great hacker stories of all my crazy accomplishments. And to be honest, I kind of blame these movies, right? I was very heartbroken when I first started getting into heavily into pen testing, and I found out that you don't actually fly through towers of data on your way to, hacking the Gibson, right? And I'm not stopping bullets with my scanning code in my hand. And the only part about any of this that's actually true is the blue team always has a weird guy with a ponytail that's trying to stop you. That's the only true part. One of my favorite hacker stories ever, as I just said, that pen testing is not sexy. This is a very sexy story. We have a client that was a sort of mid-sized credit union, and they were wondering if it was possible to circumvent their procedures and literally steal their money. So we had our boss opened up an account with this bank, actually deposited money into it, and long story short, I was able, through a series of phone calls and emails and conversations, I stole that money. I literally transferred that money into my bank account. I was a bank robber. That's a great story. I'm probably going to tell my grandchildren that story. The part that I'm going to leave out is the 36 hours of hold music that I had to listen to waiting for the customer service to pick up. The part that I'm not going to tell is when I was trying to lie and say that I was Tim Medine, and they asked me for my social security number, and I rant off 4 numbers, and she says, no, that's not you. I'm like, oh, have a good day, right? Just hang up the phone and try again. We sell it as sexy. But just like any other job, there's a reason we get paid to do it. It's frustrating. I argue with Microsoft Word constantly. I'm lucky there's not QWERTY imprinted across my forehead from slamming my head on my desk. It's like that some days. The third one, reporting is important and writing it doesn't have to be awful. And you absolutely 100% have to be good at it. I make the jokes about dealing with Microsoft Word, and it's true. I didn't become a pen tester to write a report. I didn't become a pen tester to, give a list of. That's not the cool part, right? But it's necessary and it's part of the job. And for those of you that have any real interest in actually being a penetration tester, and we'll talk a little bit more about reporting a little bit, write this down. This is almost mandatory viewing at Red Siege. And B.B. King from Black Hills gives a great presentation on what makes a good report, how to screenshot, what does an executive summary looks like, what should it contain. Those are things that are mission critical for us at Red Siege. So because we're all aspiring pen testers, or I'm assuming that's why we're here, we're going to do our first little crowd interaction thing here. So we're going to say 1, 2, 3, go, and we're all going to say, I will write my report as I go. All right, everybody ready? Well, pay attention. 1, 2, 3. I will write my report as I go. Congratulations, you all passed your pen testing interview. I mean, as goofy as that sounds, like we ask that question on Red Siege interviews when we're hiring new employees. We ask them about the reporting style. And if they tell us that they don't report until the end of the test, we're probably not going to hire that person. And mostly this is why. So we hand over our report as kind of our proof of work to our clients. And that's the proof that we actually did something. And while, yeah, the cool hacking stories, like that's really great for all of us that are here to talk and have a good time. But our clients need actionable data. They need a list. This is what I found. This is what hosts it was affected by. This is a recommended remediation. This is what I did to find it. And we make it as easy as possible for our clients to be able to replicate whatever we've done. If you're interested, redsiege.com/sample, you can view one of our sample reports. And it's actually the template and structure that we use when we're actually delivering client reports. There's nothing redacted. There is no special sauce. What we show you is what we do. But for those that maybe won't go check it out, essentially we have an executive summary is always the first piece. The executive summary goes to the C-level folks, the ones that can't be bothered to read any more than 200 or 300 words at a time. It's very high level. We have this little cute like pie chart right here, right? You know, people like colors and numbers and stuff. So that's what we include for the C-level folks. We talk about high level what we found. We also take that opportunity to give our recommendations, and then we throw out positive findings because it's not always about tearing the blue team down, right? Well, it's never about tearing them down. It's also about pointing out things that they're doing well. Every finding looks something like this. You know, I mentioned it's the observation. It's a good screenshot. Gives them actionable data on what we saw and how we saw it and what to do to replicate it. Don't take our word for it though. This guy, Julio, I guess like Cesarfort, put together a really cool repository of sample reports from a bunch of other pen testing companies. And it's not just Red Siege that does this. It's almost like an industry standard. Like this is how we report. It's effective. It works. It's boring, but it's necessary. So if you're looking to become a pen tester, kind of do what I did. So what I did was I did a fake write-up for a Hack the Box machine. I redacted some of it. That's why it's kind of crossed out. But I use this as something to showcase my writing ability. If I had to do it again, I would have had somebody else proofread it because I read it like 3 months in the job. I was, oh God, this is awful. Punctuation, spelling, like those are things that we all take seriously. And the reason being, if a client sees a report that's like filled with spelling errors and bad design and inaccurate host names, they're going to assume that your testing was just as sloppy as inaccurate. So take the writing seriously, do some practice, show up to a job interview with your sample writing. If we've got 2 people applying for a job at Red Siege and they have the exact same experience and one of them is a good report writer and one of them is not, that's a no-brainer for us. There's no discussion. We're taking the report writer, and that's how critical it is for the day-to-day job. I submitted this talk with 6 things and made a 7th. Luckily, I can do whatever I want, right? We love it. I talk about red versus blue. Fact of the matter is, you're on the same damn team. Any like SOC analysts or incident response people, threat hunters, anybody like that in the room? What would you say that your goal is as a blue teamer?
Figure out what chinks in the chain we have.
He says, figure out what chinks in the chain he's got. Anybody else? What other goals do we have? Way in the back, I think I see a hand. It's all bright. Oh yeah, or whoever. I'm just pointing, right? Whatever you feel is best. What you got? I'm sorry? To identify stuff. Anybody else? Any other great suggestions, ideas, things, goals? Catch threats. So I'm going to lead here, right? With basically it sounds like your goal is really to like make your environment safer, right? You're identifying threats. You're cutting out kinks in your chain. You're doing all that. Turns out me as a penetration tester, that's actually my goal as well. It's just a different methodology of discovering these vulnerabilities. I'm not out to embarrass a blue team. I'm not out to high five and be like, yeah, screw these guys, we got them. I do the Tron thing, man. I fight for the users, right? I just do it in a way that I find the most fun. So like, this is not how you write a pen test report. There's no value from this, right? There's no reason to dog anybody or knock them down. And just because something seems very obvious to us as penetration testers, it's not always so simple and easy for our blue team friends. I found this infographic randomly on the internet about what different blue team responsibilities are. And to be honest, I don't know what half of these words even mean. Blue teaming is hard. And what's not on this is things like company politics, right? And budget constraints and a CFO that doesn't care about security, right? Those are things that we do not have to deal with as penetration testers. A prime example, for those that don't know, Windows Server 2012 just went end of life. It's going to be very easy for me as a penetration tester to identify these end-of-life operating systems and put in a report and say, hey, there's no more security patches for this. You have to fix it. That's a 15-minute activity for me. That's potentially a multi-million-dollar 2-year project for our blue team friends. Cut them some slack. We're on the same team. That being said, number 4. The real world is absolutely filled with Active Directory. Literally every company that's more than like 15 people has some sort of Active Directory infrastructure. I say that as Red Sheets does not have Active Directory infrastructure. Sorry. But most of them do. Any client that you'll be penetration testing for will have something like this. When I was learning to pen test, I spent a lot of time on these kind of sites. You know, your Hack the Boxes, your Vuln Hub, Virtual Hacking Lab. And a lot of these are set up as what we refer to as like boot to root machines, right? Where the machine boots up and everything that you need to accomplish something is on that one machine. I know these platforms are starting to expand, there's better education, all that jazz, but for the vast majority of these technical resources, they're built that way. They're built to where everything is in one small container and everything that you need to succeed is on that machine. The real world is not like that. And while these resources are great, it's an awesome opportunity to learn your different tools and see what the output looks like and learn how to manipulate data. They're great resources, but you can't stop with just these things. I mean, for example, like a very real world attack path is I started externally. I did a bunch of user enumeration, open source intelligence. I started password spraying. Somebody had a password of fall 2023 exclamation point. I logged in remotely via the VPN. I'm in the VPN. I'm looking for traffic on the network. I see LLM and R traffic. I'm able to capture, do a machine in the middle attack. I've got a password hash to crack the password hash, log into the machine, get the machine, dump credentials. I'm domain admin. That 17 goofy step process is an actual attack chain. That's how they actually look. So when I said there's no bullet points, there's just these two, right? So this slide, next slide, if you're gonna take notes or pictures, I would do these next two. You have to learn the good stuff, the stuff that we actually use in the real world. My coworker, Corey, did a 5-part blog series on reconnaissance, how to discover information about your target before you ever send them a packet of data. redcg.com/haystack. That's where you can view that. Because every red team operation where you're running low and slow and trying not to get detected begins with some level of reconnaissance. It is mission critical to know how to do that. Your networking fundamentals. The Network Plus material is very good. You know, it's an inch deep and a mile wide, but it gives you a very great layout fundamentally of how networks work. And regardless of whether you ever go into being a network engineer for a job or not, almost everything that you do in IT operates over a network layer. So you're going to be interacting with your local network or the internet in one way, shape, or fashion literally all the time. And if you don't know how the network works, you're going to be like sitting on your hands not knowing what to do a whole lot of the times. Learn how to password spray. Learn what credential stuffing is. There's a really cool tool out there. It's open source on GitHub. It's called CredMaster. CredMaster gives you the ability to spray against Microsoft 365 and ADFS portals and all that good stuff. Full disclosure, if you do this without permission, you are committing a crime. So please don't do that and get caught. So don't do that and get caught. Kind of brings me to my next section here, build out a lab. Honestly, one of the coolest things when interviewing people that are trying to get into cybersecurity is asking them what they do at home. What do you do on your Thursdays? What have you built? What are you talking about? How are you practicing? Because passion will beat out literally anything else in this job. InfoSec is not a sprint. InfoSec is a marathon, and it changes all the time. If you are a super elite, great God tier pen tester in 2023, in 2027, you're not going to be that good unless you continue to learn still. Technology changes all the time. So learn how to build some labs. Specifically that top one, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, it's called Game of Active Directory. It is an Active Directory structure that is specifically vulnerable. And it is filled with stuff that we actively exploit every week. Active Directory certificate services, Kerberos, old tickets, bad passwords, it's all in there. And it's applicable. It is things that we use. The second link, detectionlabs.network. It's sort of the similar thing, but it's got built-in detection tools. So you can run some of your tools on this pre-built thing and then interact with a SIEM. Basically, a SIEM is what blue teamers use to identify threats. That and a bunch of other cool stuff, but like I said, I don't know what it is because blue teaming is hard. But you can see what a defender sees when you're doing a port scan. What does a defender see when you're trying to bypass AV and EDR? What does a defender see when you are trying to run some sort of application that's not allowed listed on the machine? And you can get used to that kind of stuff. And when you learn how it works, you can better learn how to break it. Learn to use command and control framework. We talk about, ransomware is like all the new hotness, right? Ransomware is essentially some kind of command and control framework. There is a server that's out in the internet somewhere that is communicating somehow way, and you are attacking an infrastructure essentially from something in the cloudish. And command and control is how all this operates. You get like a beacon on a machine, and that beacon sort of acts as your machine in the middle between where your commands are and then like your client's environment. If you've ever seen the first Independence Day, same kind of deal. The C2 matrix, admittedly, the industry standard is using Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike's like $5,000 a year, not in everybody's budget. C2 matrix has some free utilities out there. I would advise just getting used to that style of penetration testing because it's becoming more and more relevant every day. And the last one is just techniques, Kerberosing, delegation style attacks, constraint-based delegations, Active Directory certificate services are all the new latest and greatest hotnesses. Google that stuff. I mean, those are whole conversations on their own. But if you learn how to do those things, you can be a pen tester right now and be good at it. So, number 5. As much as we like to break things, on every test, you have a time limit and you have a lot of rules. One of the things there's a guy named Kevin Johnson from Secure Ideas, and he says he never said this, but I'm quoting it on him anyways because I'm pretty sure he did. Is like what makes a good penetration tester is the amount of time that it takes you to become savvy in your client's environments. That the quicker that you can learn about what's on a network and how it's interacting and what all's talking to each other, the more time that you can spend breaking it. Like I said, he says he didn't say it, but I think it's brilliant. I'm just gonna keep quoting him on it. God, there's another point here. What was I supposed to say? Oh, I lost it. Okay, so next one is we're gonna do another crowd interaction piece. So we have 2 scenarios here. The first scenario, and you guys get to choose which one you'd rather do, is you can get domain admin via some 0-day that you spent yourself 4 whole business days writing. It leads to access of a customer database that's got all kinds of payment information. Essentially a very critical finding, right? Your second option is you don't go down that rabbit hole and you spend a good amount of time doing a thorough sweep of all the in-scope hosts, but you only really found some low and medium findings. Which one do you do? What we got? Somebody's hands. We got hands up somewhere? Or just yell it out? Okay. The second one? Number 2?
First.
The first one? Oh, there's more than 3 people in here. I'll just stay in here and wait. We can wait, right? Number 2. So the truth is it depends on what your client wants, is the actual answer. Communication becomes very key in these type of situations where if I think that there's a rabbit hole that will lead me to something like this, I'll just call my client and say, hey, is this what you want to spend your money on, right? Do you feel like this is a good use of your time, or would you rather me do the second one, or vice versa, right? Keep that communication Be flexible. When I was doing pen test interviews, somebody once asked me if I considered pen testing an art or a science. At the time, I was brand new to pen testing. And for me, it was 100% science, that I knew that I had a checklist in my brain. And if on every client network, I went through that checklist and I made it all the way through, I could at least sleep at night feeling like I did my job. As I have began to learn and grow, you kind of add that little bit of artistic to it, right? Like I just know based on, if they've got a whole SQL cluster in a very small VM section, then I'm probably going to attack some SQL stuff, right? Like I don't need to go through my methodology line by line. Just by the nature of there being huge amounts of SQL, I'm probably going to find something there. So as you learn and grow, follow those rules. Abide by the scope. That was it. Abide by your rules and learn to grow yourself and how you pen test and how your methodology changes over time. And so the part that I missed, right, was your scope. So on every penetration test, there's a statement of work that talks about the work that we're going to do, and then there's an actual defined scope. Most of the time, it is a flat, like, this network segment is in scope, this network segment is not. And for a lot of companies, it can be very critical stuff. If you are penetration testing a hospital and they say, don't do this /24, and then you hit that /24 and turns out that /24 has like breathing machines on it, you could actually kill somebody. You could actually kill somebody, right? And going out of scope like that and potentially breaking something that you shouldn't can actually be a resume generating event. I mean, we'd probably fire somebody if they went blatantly out of scope and it caused a negative impact to our clients' environments. The reason why I learned network fundamentals, so you can learn what scope is. So that being said, if you got here a little bit early, like don't spoil it, but under one of these chairs somewhere is a prize. I mean like an actual prize. So if everyone takes 5 seconds and like look under your chair, maybe look one's next to you, you might find some hotness there. All right. Man. Wait, nobody found it? You know why? There's nothing there. Because as much as we talk about scoping and rules, at the end of the day, if it's not explicitly forbidden in my client's environment, it is fair game. And nobody told me that I couldn't lie to my audience to their faces during my talk. So that's why it's here. So abide by your scopes, don't violate the rules, do your best judgment. When we do physical engagements, where we physically go and try to break into a place, a client will say, oh, everything's in scope, do what you want. And I'll say, well, can I throw a brick through the window at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday? Well, absolutely not. Like, okay, there are actually rules. Let's meet in the middle. Communication, have those discussions. Please don't beat me up after this. Number 6, your reputation is everything in penetration testing. And I don't mean that as you can't sit at the table if you're not one of the cool kids. What I mean is we deal with our clients' secrets. A lot of times they are big secrets. They are everything from payment information to patient data to sometimes R&D information, C-level, pay bonuses, and everything across the board in between. If you violate that trust of your clients and you put stuff out on the internet or you talk about something publicly that you shouldn't, there's a strong possibility that someone's paying attention and can follow your footsteps and then maliciously get access to that stuff. And you could be the breach for your client. And that's awful, right? Like we fight for the users. We're here to do the right thing. We do not want to be the cause of the breach. And so if you're at Red Siege and you did that, we would fire you immediately. You would no longer be our employee. And while there are other pen testing firms out there, and in a sense, like we're all kind of competing for business, we're all also friends. And if you go apply at another pen testing firm and they saw that you worked at Red Siege, they're probably going to call Tim the boss and be like, hey, why'd you fire Jason? Well, Jason was an asshole. Well, but we fired him because he leaked data, right? Like that's what we did it for. Our industry is not that big. Sure, there are 1,700 people here, and DEF CON's got 30,000 people, but you'd be surprised how quickly being an asshole, like an actual asshole, and doing something malicious will ripple across our community. So if you're going to be in the industry and you're going to make that jump, understand that people are trusting you. The other piece, and this is my, for those of you who don't know, Legend of Zelda, Triforce, Power, Wisdom, Courage. I have, right? Yeah. I have redubbed it to the Triforce of InfoSec gatekeeping. Because every hiring manager will argue with another hiring manager until they're blue in the face about which one of these things that they prefer. Some people are going to want you to have your OSCP. You need to have this certification, or we're not having a conversation with you. Or you got to have a college degree. It's not even an option. Or you got to have 3 years experience in some kind of tech before we even have a conversation with you. And people will argue all the time, literally arguments, deciding which one is best. And ultimately, if you want to be a pen tester, figure out a way to do all three. Really, or really any part in your career, right? Like, don't be like, if someone has 3 out of 3 and you have 2 out of 3, you're going to lose those interview opportunities. However, as we can all see in our Triforce, there's that big hole in the middle, and that's your network, right? These are people that you know and have met and already trust you. I talked about early on about my job at Red Siege, right, where there was the giants, Tim Medine, curb roasting, synonymous, changed the world forever. Other guys, 10 or 15 years. And then me, Jason Downey, junior pen tester, what am I doing here? So what happened is I went to a conference just like this one called DerbyCon. And DerbyCon had an InfoSec resume review workshop and mock interviews. And I got paired with Tim. And Tim reviewed my resume, thought it looked good. We had a mock interview. At the end of the interview, Tim says, like, man, Jason, he's like, I just started a company. He's like, if I had a job for a junior, I would hire you. I'm like, well, thanks, but I still don't have a job, right? But I kept in contact with Tim. Tim essentially acted as like a kind of a semi-mentor for a couple of years. I would tell him I was interested in something. He would send me some links, and he sort of saw me grow over time. A couple years after this, I'd leveled up my skills significantly, and that phone call came. Hey, Jason, I saw you're looking for a job again. My company's growing a little bit. I've got a spot for you. Do you want it? Yes, I do. I'm very happy it worked out that way, right? My network allowed me to not jump all those other things. It doesn't replace all those other things, but it definitely puts your name in the front of the line. How many of you all, when you sat down for this talk, maybe got here a little bit early, leaned into the person next to you and introduced yourself? Couple? Yeah. You should do that every time. I'm very, very glad that you all came to watch my talk. I appreciate you fully. Like talking to this, we're gonna take a selfie in a minute because I'm excited. But don't just come to conferences and sit in talks. Go out in the hallway and have conversations. Like this gentleman right here, whose name I forgot, I'm sorry. We were sitting down and having lunch together, and we were talking about how we do different things and shop and techniques, and I'm able to learn and grow from him, and the same way he's able to learn and grow from me. Who knows what this might turn into 5 years? So I might need him for a job. You might need me for a job, right? You never know. Don't burn bridges. Go out there and build a whole bunch of them. There are 1,700 other people here that are very excited about InfoSec. You can find something in common. Oh, that Tim Medine InfoSec job story, yep. So yeah, I left some time at the end for comments or for questions, but let's keep hanging out. So when I talk about sort of networking and building a tribe, I'll talk about a couple things, shameless self-Red Siege promotion, right? We do something every Wednesday called the Wednesday Offensive. It's at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, and literally anybody can join. And every week we have a different speaker on who's a name in the industry, from SANS instructors to research people to sometimes blue team folks. And they just share whatever they're talking about, and then we have a conversation about it. And it's an awesome networking opportunity to learn for free. It's 30 minutes. It's no slides. We cut off right at 30 minutes. There's no BS. It's just that every week. We do have a Red Siege Discord, and we're open for conversation. Like if you have a question about stuff or a research that you're doing or anything about pen testing, you can hop on our Discord and ask us, and we'll answer you. Maybe not right away because we are billable sometimes, but we'll get to you. I guarantee it. And then me directly, right? So I'm not very active on Twitter as far as posting, but I have open DMs, and I will answer any question anybody ever asks me. And then last one is my email. Please don't add that to your spam lists. But do email me if you have questions, right? Like I mean it when I say that pen testing made me a better human being, and I really want the same for everybody else. And I think that's it. Who's got questions? Who wants to know some more? No, yeah.
we're a blue team, and we're thinking about maybe leaning towards purple, trying to do some things internally instead of just relying on monthly or yearly pen testing service. Do you have any suggestions on what we should probably look into, whether it's open source tools or just? I mean, sure, I can check door knobs all day long.
Right.
But I'm talking beyond level 1 on the OSI scale.
Okay. Yeah, so the question was, so they are part of a blue team, and they are starting to do some more purple team activities where they want to sort of emulate a penetration test instead of hiring someone to do it, annually or biannually or whichever. And so my suggestions are firstly, if your pen testing companies that you hire, if they give you any kind of methodology of the work they've done, just repeat that work starting out, right? Have conversations with pen testers. Say, hey, what are some common findings that you're seeing, and what are the tools that you're using? Like if you catch me after this, I'll give you like 10 really cool things that you can do on your own in practice, right? And then build that behavior, and then try to shorten like your, what do you guys call it? Like time to react or time from incident or time, like try to, you shorten that time where, oh, well, this happened and we didn't notice it till 4 hours. Well, why did we notice it for 4 hours, right? Tweak and sort of run that rotation over. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's also something called the Atomic Red Team. And so what the Atomic Red Team does is it provides very quick framework of different ransomware and APTs, advanced persistent threats, and the techniques that they use. And so it gives you a playbook, right? And you can detect that. Did you detect number 1, number 2, number 3? And that's really useful for starting out.
Thank you so much. From a certification perspective, outside the learning resources you provided, what would you suggest for somebody that has literally 0 to 9, very little continuing experience, CPA, Pentest Plus, etc.? What would you recommend?
Okay. I'm going to answer. So the question was like, what certifications do I recommend for someone that has little to no experience that wants to become sort of a penetration tester? The short answer is the golden standard is the OSCP. It is the most renowned cert. It's on every pen test job application. It's only sort of an entry-level cert. It's very tough and it's time demanding. And in my opinion, it's not the best learning format, but it is industry-wise the gold standard. It's also not cheap. It's like $1,500 or something, right? Really, for anybody that wants to become a red teamer, I mentioned earlier where before you can learn how something breaks, you have to learn how it works first. So if you can find yourself, any kind of experience beforehand in sort of like a blue team role where you're a sysadmin or VMware or cloud or whatever, right? And you become experts about how to build and make these things, you're way better about learning how to break it on down the road. Some other notable certs I recently just did, it's called the CRTO, Certified Red Team Operator. It's a little bit on the advanced side, but it's only $250 and it's very good. What else we got? More hands? Anybody back there? I think I see a hand. Oh, what's my favorite tool? Okay. And so the question was, when I'm not doing social engineering stuff, what is my favorite tool? Honestly, it's Nmap. Like Nmap is the most used tool in my toolbox. It does host discovery. It does service enumeration. We at Red Siege even added on a small script where it takes Nmap results and spit it out and makes it more digestible. Nmap is by far, as non-sexy and exciting as it is, probably my favorite tool. I guess other kind of cool tools, right? Like I really enjoy CredMaster because anything that allows me to like press one button and eventually get credentials, I think is really dope. Responder is really fun if you're already on a network. The ability to capture net NTLM hashes with doing very little effort. I can run in the background and check it back in 6 hours. I'm like, oh, I've got hashes I can crack. I'm a big fan of that. What else we got?
So there's obviously always going to be harping on passwords. People use bad passwords.
Yeah.
Have you actually seen an increase in organizations starting to use password managers? And have you actually seen that helping the organizations, or are people still doing different things?
So the question was, are we actually seeing an improvement in our clients like password infrastructure and increased use of things like password managers instead of stupid password mistakes? I think the short answer is yes. I think that over time, people are becoming more aware of password stuff, right? Like if I said the word password manager in a room full of people 7 years ago, eyes would have gone crossed, right? Like password manager? You mean like my notebook, right? And I recently just talked to a local community college, and I asked them, like, hey, it was to their faculty, I'm like, how many of you all use password managers? And a couple hands go up in the air. I was really kind of impressed. Like these are not technical people, and it's starting to like make its way out. To expand on that a little bit, the unfortunate truth is like when we think about IT in general, right? So in the 90s, there was just the IT guy or girl, and they did the printing, they did the file stuff, they did whatever. And now everybody is doing IT a little bit in their day jobs, whether they're nurses or teachers or whatnot. We're really hitting the point where like security is becoming everybody's job. Where we can do a whole lot as pen testers and blue teamers and SOC analysts and threat hunters. But if our end users are still kind of doing dumb stuff, right? Like it's real hard to save them from themselves. Did that answer your question? Yeah, there we go.
Scariest thing you can talk about that makes you go, oh crap, I'm going to stop this right now.
I'm sorry, ask me that one more time.
Sorry. Scariest thing that you found that made you go, oh crap, I have to stop right now.
Scariest thing that made me go, oh crap, I have to stop right now. So this part didn't actually happen to me. One of our coworkers a couple of years ago was doing a test, and he was finding sort of like artifacts on machines of like pen testing tooling. And he's like, hey, you guys ever been pen tested before? And they're like, no, you guys are our first time. It's like, well, you've been breached because these tools are on a box. He kind of had like the oh crap moment where he stopped in his place and and had to tell the client, like, you need to call an incident response company because you've been got by somebody. For me personally, a fun one was I was doing a mid-sized bank, and I was perusing shared drives and looking at all the gold that people leave out on public shares. And I'm clicking through Word documents, and I'm in one, and it's like safe number 1, and there's like 5 numbers there, right? And then safe number 2, and then ATM code number 1, and ATM code number 2. I'm like, oh shit. Like, I can go get paid right now, or I could like correctly disclose this to the client. Obviously, I went for the latter because I still work for a living, right? But so I stopped what I did immediately, picked up the phone, called my point of contact, and was like, hey, you have bank vault codes on a publicly accessible shared drive that's probably can be viewable from like your bank's Wi-Fi. So you may want to go fix that right now. Anything else? All right, well, before I get to leave, I'm going to take a selfie because I think this is really cool, and this is definitely the biggest crowd I've talked in front of, so feel free to like cover your face if you're extra paranoid. But I'm going to do that. Otherwise, that's all I've got. So thank you guys for paying attention to me. Yeah.